Let's talk about some fast-moving shock and awe transports and some flamer damage that can deal with some of the strongest things in the game. Time for a focused overview of the Space Marine Firestorm Assault Force. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines once more, and in this video I thought we'd talk through the craziness that you can do with the Firestorm Assault Force, perhaps one of the most exciting new detachments in the Space Marine Codex, at least in my opinion. The Firestorm Assault Force is basically the Salamander-style detachment in Codex Space Marines. Obviously the way that detachments are set up, any chapter can use this now, so it's not linked to any one set of paints or unique character miniatures or anything, but it certainly seems like a detachment that's set up to make the most of close range shooting, particularly flamers and melters, though it does change up the formula for the Salamanders a fair bit, being really quite a transport heavy army, and seems to be one of the best ways to play mechanized shooty Space Marines, whether it's jumping out of land raiders, repulsors, or impulsors or other things. If you like infantry, transports and close range firepower though, then this detachment's definitely for you. Let's go over its core rules, all the stratagems and how powerful they are in game, the character enhancements and some of the best units to use with it, and then a few ideas for one strong army list built around salamanders. Jumping straight in, and the special rule for the detachment is called Close Range Eradication. This one gives all your ranged weapons the assault keyword, and when they're within 12 inches you get +1 to the strength of the attack. The assault keyword bit I think is very powerful, really quite nice for any sort of gunline Space Marine army, and it's kind of akin to having the Gladius Devastator doctrine active all game long. It means that if you've got any one unit that isn't going to be charging later in the turn, usually it's going to make sense to advance with them and move anywhere between 1 and 6 inches more. Over the course of the game that is going to offer you better positioning, getting in range of things that you might not have been able to otherwise, being able to get line of sight on things that otherwise would have been safe, and also not having to compromise if you absolutely need to move on to an objective with an advance move and not have to give up your shooting while you do that. Anything that likes advancing by its own datasheet rules is really quite nice as well. Say for example an impulsor with its advance and drop rule, it doesn't have to choose between using its firepower and using that special rule in this detachment. The other part of the rule is getting +1 strength within 12 inches when you're making a ranged attack. This one's very variable, as sometimes that is going to matter for giving you a +1 to wound against your target, but quite a bit of the time, particularly in 10th edition, it just won't make any difference whatsoever. Say for example if your bolters go from a strength 4 to a strength 5, they're still going to be wounding a toughness 6 target on a 5+ or toughness 10 vehicle on a 6. I'd say often with shooting interactions that's going to make a difference probably less than half of the time, though obviously whenever it does make an effect it will be pretty big. I think it's perhaps quite nice for things going from strength 4 to 5 or 5 to 6. That's going to be fairly meaningful against their intended targets, which are usually infantry in that sort of toughness range. It's kind of helpful for salamander type things as well, with melters going from strength 9 to strength 10. That does help them out against really quite a lot of battle tank type targets, though won't help against heavy stuff that's toughness 11 or 12. The base rules do help out quite a lot of things, but in general it's just particularly good support for close range firepower. Being able to advance and shoot means that you're more likely to get it in range, and close range firepower with things like melters, flamers or aggressor bolt storm gauntlets, they need to be getting it fairly close to the enemy anyway, so you're not really taking a positioning hit, so having just a +1 strength when they fire normally is going to be pretty great. Overall I'd say that the detachment's core rule is definitely a good one for any sort of Space Marine gunline force. Moving on to the stratagems, I do think that these are really quite strong. These really are quite heavily themed. First up, 5 out of 6 of them are battle tactics, which means that captains are just extra good here. I think if you're running this detachment, I'd strongly consider a captain just because of so many options they're going to have. 2 really good damage boosts and a couple of transport shenanigans. These kind of are the bits that really incentivize transports though. 3 of them are dedicated transport unit support, so if you're not using any, then you're going to be missing out on some of the benefits of this at least. And then the other 2 stratagems are broadly aimed at infantry as well. So in general a lot of army lists I think will be looking at an infantry list with some supporting transports. Any generic vehicles can still be great if they're efficient already, but they won't really be getting any stratagem support. As per normal for Space Marine detachments, they've got Armour of Contempt, worsening the AP by 1 when your unit's selected as the target of an attack. Very standard for Space Marines this one, and a nice durability boost, certainly helpful on things like repulsors and land raiders to survive enemy shooting. Into more interesting stuff though, and our first one is Burning Vengeance for 1 CP. This one's a fun sort of reactive shooting type stratagem. An enemy unit shoots a transport in their shooting phase. If you've got a squad inside that transport, they can immediately disembark and then immediately shoot the same enemy unit directly back. Whenever you can get a whole shooting phase out of a dangerous unit for 1 CP, it often tends to be worth it. Perhaps the dream might be if you managed to gun down a unit that was also going to pull off a dangerous charge later in the turn. That could be really quite powerful. And you could use the extra movement shenanigans to get on an objective if it made sense. Depending on what sort of army you're facing though, it might have downsides as well. If you had a unit that wanted to be safe within the transport, then getting them out to shoot is going to mean that the enemy can potentially just shoot them straight back and kill them in their own turn later. So it might not be all positives. Anything scary in a transport could be a good choice for this. Hellblasters, Aggressors, Eradicators or Sternguard or something. I feel like something like Hellblasters in an Impulso could be particularly nice, as you can fire out of it in your turn and then potentially trigger this in the enemy turn as well to get an extra round of shooting. Next for 1 CP we've got Crucible of Battle. This one's a battle tactic one once more, so a nice one to use for captains. This one's basically very similar to the powerful Salamander's stratagem from last edition, and it's just a very nice simple +1 to wound for any one infantry unit, and you can use it either when shooting or when fighting, provided they're attacking the closest eligible target. +1 to wound is often going to be just absolutely excellent value, and might have you wounding the enemy very easily in combination with the +1 strength as well. In general, I think it's going to be best when you're wounding the enemy on a 5+ with a unit that's already quite efficient, particularly things like melter weapons, wounding vehicles on a 5+, that could be a massive deal on something like Eradicators. It could be pretty nice on plasma mid-strength fire for Hellblasters versus most targets, and really nice for things like Blade Guard veterans or Power Fists in combat. Lots of AP2 damage 2 attacks there, though again if they're tangling with something really quite tough they might be wounding on 5s or worse. Definitely a staple one this one, quite a nice one for a battle tactic if you just need more damage from a captain's unit. Next up we've got another transport one called Rapid Embarkation. This allows the units to get back into a transport at the end of either player's turn. The unit just needs to be within 6 inches of that transport. It's not allowed to be in combat, and it can't have disembarked from a transport in the same turn, so you can't use this to get out, shoot the enemy, and then get back in and stay safe, which is a shame as that could have been one of the most powerful uses for it. I think for a mechanised army though, this one's really quite interesting. It definitely can give you some very interesting options. If you had a unit that started the turn outside of a transport, you could maybe deal damage with it in shooting and then jump back in afterwards. Or say if you had a unit that got out of a transport in your turn, dealt some damage to the enemy in some way, and then the enemy failed to kill it the next turn, you could jump back into the transport, all ready to use the transport's good movement to deliver them somewhere new to deal some more damage in your own turn. That seems like it could be particularly fun for, say, a Land Raider unit to go again. Say your Flamestorm Aggressors have got out and destroyed something, your opponent didn't kill them in return. At the end of the enemy turn, they can jump back in, and then be all ready to be delivered to another very scary long threat in yours. Could also use it to do things like Razorbacks getting reroll wound rolls for a second time. Perhaps one of the biggest and most terrifying ones is the Immolation Protocols one. This one's a battle tactic which allows torrent weapons to all gain devastating wounds for a unit, and you can use it on any unit in the game, though it's usually only ever going to make sense if you've got an absolute load of torrent weapons on the unit. So something like Infernus Marines, Maximal Flamestorm Aggressors, or maybe a Land Raider Redeemer at a push. I think the 2 CP cost is perhaps a little bit prohibitive. The damage output is absolutely great, though I think in general you're usually going to want to use this on a unit with a captain in it, say for example a squad of 6 Flamestorm Aggressors with a Gravis captain inside. If you're maximally fishing for devastating wounds with a Flamestorm Aggressor unit, you'd average around about 8 devastating wounds there. Means they could quite easily take a massive chunk of damage off of hard targets before following that up with a charge. Infernus Marines look like they could be another good target, either getting 6 wounds out of them as standard, or somewhere around 10 to 11 of them if they got buffed by Vulcan Hestan, and they would be rolling all wound rolls. That's getting to some seriously nasty stuff there. Fairly terrifying to have a flamer unit that's got the potential to just melt battle tanks in a single round of shooting. Finally, we've got one called Onslaught of Fire. This one's another damage dealer, and it kind of feels like a bit of a toned down version of Crucible of Battle maybe. This one's a lot more restrictive. It's a unit that disembarks from a transport that has to shoot at the closest eligible target within 12 inches of them, and they get a +1 to hit. If they happen to destroy a model in the enemy squad, then they must take a battle shock test, though I feel like that has limited value in your own turn. It's only really good for preventing defensive stratagems if it even works, or potentially scaring enemies off secondary objectives that you're trying to claim at the end of your turn. I think most of the time that will be pretty much directly inferior to Crucible of Battle, and perhaps even more so if you can use Oath of Moment on the target. That's going to have the vast majority of your hit rolls converting already. I suppose if you just wanted to stack the damage with all-in damage after a unit's got out of a transport, you could use Crucible of Battle and this, though that is a big 2 CP. I feel like most of the time the +1 to wound is going to have more value. Perhaps one of the only cases when it might not is something like a Devastator squad getting out of a Razorback perhaps. They'd be hitting on 4s with multi-melters, and they already get the reroll wound rolls from jumping out of a Razorback. Could be okay to use with them, I suppose. Overall, really scary stuff with the stratagems though. Lots of interesting and gamey things that you could do with transports. I feel like my favourites are probably the Immolation Protocols and Crucible of Battle for nice reliable damage with some captains. And Burning Vengeance is really quite powerful. Getting a big punch of damage in the opponent's turn could certainly change things around a bit. It certainly could make them a bit wary about the way that they target your transports. Lastly, for the core rules of the detachment, we've got the Enhancements. War Tempered Artifice is 25 points, and an infantry model gets +3 to the strength of its melee weapons. I think this one's a fun idea, as it could get your Power Fist up to strength 11 potentially, good for tangling with battle tanks, but for 25 points it's definitely on the pricey side. I don't think it's an auto-include or anything. Adamantine Mantle is 20 points, this one's a -1 damage to attacks against the bearer, and Melter or Torrent weapons only do damage 1 no matter what sort of profile they have. That's an alright durability boost, could be something nice on maybe a Gravis Captain or a Terminator Captain perhaps. Again though, when it's priced at 20 points it just seems mediocre for that kind of cost. Weirdly enough, by far the best two are also the cheapest two. Champion of Humanity for 10 points is a Tacticus model only. The squad that's getting led gets to ignore modifiers to their characteristics and rolls or tests for them, aside from saving throws. These upgrades are always kind of weird, as their default status is to do nothing pretty much, unless your opponent has got some sort of debuff type rules. I feel like there's enough out there in 40k though that this will generally be useful in at least a fair few games. Perhaps particularly so if you've got a big unit with -1 to wounds, say something like Custodian Wardens or Necron Lichguard. Provided you've got a big scary unit that a Tacticus model can join, I think for 10 points this is pretty much auto-include. It won't do something in every game, but the games that it does do something in, it could be massive. Finally, for 15 points, there's Forged in Battle. While leading a unit each turn, you can change one hit roll or saving throw to an automatic 6 after rolling. I feel if anything this adds a lot more reliable value than Champion of Humanity, pretty much guaranteed good value for a unit that you're leading, by the saving throw alone if nothing else. Even if you only ever triggered this once, to save one Space Marine's life changing a saving throw to a 6 against a damage 2 or better attack, you've probably already made your points back there. Never mind the fact that it actually helps you out a little bit on the offensive as well, particularly with lethal hits, and the fact that you might be able to use it more than once per game to negate multiple failed saves. Again, for 15 points this one seems pretty much auto-include provided you have a good unit to put it on. Out of these ones I definitely prefer the 2 buffing ones at the bottom of the list compared with the 2 character buffs. For a few notable units for the detachment, I feel like a lot of people are going to be building around Flamestorm Aggressors. They were 100 points for 3 or 200 for 6 in the digital rules, and they come with their twin Flamestorm gauntlets with d6+1 attacks per model, getting twin linked on the rules so you can fish for the devastating wounds with the Immolation Protocols. And for any of the wounds that aren't devastating, they'll all be at AP -1, and they'll also be attacks at strength 5 as well as per the detachment rule. They're really quite threatening in the detachment, even if they're not using Immolation Protocols, and I certainly wouldn't discount the Boltstorm loadout as well. If you're not using the Flamer buff, then they're probably better. Could be a good Crucible of Battle unit for a +1 to wound with all of that strength 5 close range shooting. That's all before they do a charge as well, and given that their Power Fist now hit on a 3+, not a 4, they've got even better there as well. I deliver them to battle probably out of a Land Raider, could consider a Repulsor I suppose. Talking of which, Repulsors seem pretty excellent with all the transport shenanigans that they can do. The digital points were 195, and that gets you a fair amount of tough transport with toughness 12 and 16 wounds, though fairly vulnerable against higher AP attacks with only a 3+ save and no invulnerable. This one gets a whole bunch of shots with its Repulsor defensive array, which could absolutely profit from being strength 5 up close, and its special rule is that rather nice one to protect shooting units, allowing you to get them back into the Repulsor if they're charged. That does seem like a pretty godly special rule for a detachment that's all based around ranged shooting units in transport. Getting them charge protection is amazing, and particularly as a few of the things actually trigger for units in transport, 2 of the stratagems trigger for units inside transport, so being able to get your units back inside it easier seems like a real win. Feels like this one could be a nice one for delivering Eradicators maybe. Depending on the eventual points cost, I feel like Razorbacks with Devastators could be kind of interesting. There may be a touch on the pricey side in the digital points at 100, but this detachment seems very nice indeed for multi-melter Devastators jumping out of them. They get 4 reroll wound rolls and they'll be hitting at strength 10 if you could get them in close. Plus could maybe be a nice one for the re-embark stratagem to allow them to get out in another turn as well. And finally, for some of the main units I wanted to mention, the Impulsor seems very well suited to this detachment too. In a ranged units and transports army, having firing deck 6 is really quite nice to allow you the option of keeping your unit embarked in the impulsor. You could maybe have a squad of hellblasters in there and shoot out of it, and then if the enemy targets your transport with a ranged attack, they can then get out and shoot them back in the enemy turn. That could be pretty big. Otherwise, for 80 points, I feel like they're fairly efficient, a reasonable enough defensive profile for that cost, a few anti-infantry type weapons, and your choice of top hatch upgrades. I do quite like the Bellicator's missile. You can actually make good use of its special rule as well with the advance and drop, as then you're not sacrificing your shooting by doing that in this force. Means that you could potentially be moving 18 inches, then drop the unit, and both units still be able to shoot, which is some pretty mad threat range. You could also do more transport shenanigans with eliminators with instigator bolt carbines as well. Their move shoot move rule can potentially allow them to shoot twice with this, though it does seem like a rules oversight on Games Workshop's part. Otherwise, loads of other things that look particularly interesting in this detachment. Captains, as mentioned, I think will be popular due to the good battle tactics. Volcanistan could be really nice with the Torrent Stratagem for re-rolling immolation protocols. Loads of good options for infantry and transport. Eradicators, Aggressors, Hellblasters, Cernguard and Infernus Marines seem good picks, and Blade Guard would be quite nice with the Crucible of Battle Stratagem. Big range shooting vehicles maybe aren't the focus of the stratagems, but they'll still very much like being able to advance and shoot. Very nice to have hypermobile gladiator lancers. Redemptor dreadnoughts wouldn't have to compromise between keeping up fire and getting their melee towards the enemy quite quickly, and it seems a nice detachment for the gladiator valiant as well. That kind of wants to get up close already due to its multi-melters, and with the close range shooting of the multi-melters you could make them up to strength 10 again. The Repulsor Executioner is also definitely worth a mention. That's just a big scary gun tank in itself that has a small amount of transport capacity. Might be nice for a little bit more of a situational type transport to have a bit more of a counter-attack type enemy unit in. Maybe something like some Eradicators or Hellblasters or something that could threaten to get out if it gets shot. Lots of fun stuff with the Divergent chapters as well. Black Templars will really like the cheap multi-melters on transports for impulsors and repulsors. Again, they just fit in kind of beautifully with being short-range firepower on powerful transports. Blood Angels Death Company can take a whole bunch of hand flamers. They could be another interesting choice for immolation protocols. And Deathwatch have got all manner of close-range shooting options that would quite enjoy having +1 strength. Could be an interesting sort of army for a Mechanised Deathwatch list. Finally, here's just one very rough idea for a Firestorm Assault army list. Perhaps something not too far away from this could be an idea just for an experimental Firestorm Assault Force. This absolutely definitely isn't optimised or anything, just throwing together a few units that seem broadly kind of good. 4 big threats in 4 transports with some attached characters, plus a little bit of support. In this one there's a Gravis Captain leading the aggressors with the Flamestorm gauntlets for the big free immolation protocol stratagem. They're jumping out of the Land Raider to hopefully follow up with a charge. And then there's another Land Raider Redeemer packing a whole load of Blade Guard. They've got Adrax Agatone for 4 wound rerolls there, making them just into a very scary unit and could be a good choice for Crucible of Battle. Then there's Volcanistan joining the new company heroes for a bodyguard. He's there to give the Land Raiders with their multi-melters and great big Redeemer Flamestorm cannons big rerolls against 1 marked target. He just aimed to footslog up to one of the central objectives and uses big objective control to take that. There's an Impulsor with some Bellicator's missiles. That takes a squad of Hellblasters with an attached lieutenant with Power Fist ignoring modifiers from the enhancement. That could deliver them a very long threat range onto a midfield objective or get line of sight on something unexpected, and potentially they could be an option for firing out the top hatch of the Impulsor for a turn and threaten to disembark and shoot if the enemy shoots the Impulsor themselves. They wouldn't get the lieutenant's buff until they've actually disembarked though, of course. Then there's a unit of Devastators with multi-melters being delivered by a Razorback with a las cannon. If they can get within 9-inch range, they're going to make some serious damage happen with strength 10 multi-melters that reroll wound rolls, and they could be quite a good target for either the +1 to hit stratagem, or maybe Oath of Moment, or perhaps even both. Then potentially to either screen the midfield or hold a backfield objective with denying deep strike, there's a unit of Infiltrators. And finally, just for an annoying strategic reserve type threat, there's a unit of Eradicators as well, popping up somewhere to try and lay waste to an enemy tank or heavy hitter. Overall, definitely not a particularly honed or massively thought through list or anything, but I feel like at least it has a bunch of really quite fun and very heavy hitting damage things. The Aggressors, Blade Guard, Hellblasters and Devastators will all leave a big dent on the target, and I probably wouldn't underestimate the power of the Land Raider Redeemers themselves with re-rolling wounds with the big Flamestorm cannons. In any case, let me know any theory crafting that you've been doing. What sort of army list would you be tempted to run with this detachment? I think we'll leave that there for this video in any case. Certainly seems like one of the better Space Marine formations though. I wouldn't be too surprised at all to see this being run competitively quite a bit. In any case, I think I'll leave that there for this one. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see other similar videos like this. I'll leave my similar review of the Ironstorm Spearhead links down in the video description below. That's the Space Marine detachment focusing around walkers and tanks with big rerolls and damage buffs. I'll aim to make some similar reviews for every detachment in the new codex as soon as I can. Finally, if you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.